Okay, whenever you're ready, bud.
So today I'm going to talk about formal SQL etiquette. This is just coming from experience at Dart Transit Company, where I've been working for the past 3 years. So I have about 2.5 years of SQL experience there. So first off, why is SQL etiquette important? So SQL is the standard query language. It's called that basically because it's always the same. It's just one type of code for the entire SQL. So you kind of need to standardize it the way you write it as well. And in a business setting, it's going to be used by many different employees, so it's really important to make it so that anyone can read it and understand your code, right? Coworkers shouldn't have to ask you what your SQL is doing. You should always be able to make that said in the SQL by making comments or just making it really well organized so that they can easily follow through it. Understandable nomenclature drives off confusion, which is basically don't use any words that to you mean this when it doesn't mean that to someone else. Always use things in a business that is understandable, right? And then consistency makes everything run smoother. That's kind of an obvious point in everything in life. So commenting is a really big part of it. This is how I do my comments. You always want to tell them who wrote it, when they wrote it, and why you wrote it. Commenting on the important parts of code is also really important, like where joins happens, or unions, or filters, and telling them exactly what it's doing so that they can easily just read through it and see what you're doing if they ever need to change your code, or if you want to go back and change your own code. It's also really important to comment on things so that when changes are made to your SQL, it's just really obvious what you need to change, and then you can make a comment on what was changed. And then we'll talk about whenever you make changes, other tips that you should be doing as well. Commenting any other important details about the code or the project behind the code. So you should always kind of I just have a really small purpose here, but you should have like a very in-depth purpose of who told you to do what and what they said, and then what your interpretation of what they said is, so that you have everything kind of written down and organized. Never leave anything in your head out. Naming, so this is just making formal variable names for all of your columns and everything. You should never, at Dart at least, all of our variable names are really stupid looking. Like I kind of made an example here. They always have like a stupid first part and then an underscore and then the actual name of what it is. So you should always do aliases for everything that you do, so that rather than leaving it up to when you're making a visualization or when you're doing it in any other program, you don't have to change the names there, just change it here. This is like the first step, and just do it in the first step, especially if you're going to turn into a report. You'll just be saving yourself time, so just make aliases first step of the way. Formal variable names should be understood in the industry and business. So this is going over the nomenclature of the business. Don't put names that you would understand, put them what the business understands and the industry understands. So make sure that you're like familiar with the words of the industry and that you're using things that everyone will understand that you're giving it to. And never put any underscores or other special characters in your aliases. They just don't look good, and you're not going to do that on a visualization for the name, so don't do it for an alias for the name. Locations of important SQL lines. So SQL already breaks everything up into select, from, and where. So put everything that belongs in those 3 places in those 3 places. Don't ever put joins in the where clause. Always put your joins in the from clause. So you have the from A is your first table, and then this is your second table and your third table. You can join things in the where clause, but then you're just mixing it in with filters and subselects and everything else. And if your SQL statement is super long and someone's trying to read through it, they're not going to look through every single where clause just to find where the second table you're joining to is coming from. Another thing is to organize your table into, or your SQL into where your tables are joining. So if you're joining to table A first, and then you're joining to B second from A, and then from C from B, then put them in that order so that people can follow the string of tables you're joining to get to C where you're grabbing something about chairs, right? Always make sure everything's in order of where you're joining to. And then organizing the where clause just with where your filters are. So if I had multiple filters, I just put them all right here, and then sub-selects all right here. Like case statements, just organize everything into the same spots so that it's super easy to follow. You will thank me later. Being consistent. I would suggest before, I did not do this, and I regret not doing this, even though I was told to. Start out by making a bunch of folders where you'll be keeping all of your SQL queries, like your saved ones, in different categories of what they're going to be about. So you're not going to understand all the folders that they'll be about in the first place, but maybe your first project, create a folder that's like somewhat broad of where it'll be, and then from there just keep creating folders for different things. Otherwise you're just going to have a folder of like 1,000 different SQL queries, and it's a mess. Always keep your spacing and commenting consistent, like on the last page. Make sure that your commenting is always the same, you're not changing anything. Obviously you can get better by like making your commenting better, but don't ever get worse or like take something out, because then people who are familiar with your type of commenting is going to go back and then just to completely forget how you're doing things and miss things. Save drafts of queries with dates when you save them. So then if you make changes on a query and then you realize it's completely wrong, you can go back a few drafts or a draft and then start from there again, right? So you don't make mistakes and then have to delete the code and then you don't know if you saved it right and so forth. And then checking accuracy. This is really huge with SQL because it doesn't necessarily fail or error if you're not doing it correctly, if the numbers aren't aggregated at the same level or something. So you always want to check your accuracy of quantitative variables. So a nice way to do this is write a small simple queries to check certain variable accuracies. So just like a 2-line SQL thing to check one variable at a time, and you can do that with all your variables to make sure they're all correct. Or you can use programs or visualizations to load to check accuracy. You can make a graph, right, with just 1 or 2 variables just to see where it lies. Checking the overall aggregation level is really good. The best way to do that is just pick one row, right, just like this ID number, and then do a simple query and see what that level is, and then make sure all of the stats in that level are all the exact same, right? So you can do that by just taking your whole SQL and filtering it to just one row ID and just having the 1 and check it on some other program or some other SQL statement. And then always check. Always check with the customer. I call it customer, but it may be your boss that's telling you to write this, or it could be another employee. Customer is kind of just a broad term that we use at Dart. So always check with them that it meets their expectations or their requests. That's it.